All right. So, this is just a little short, quick little thing because uh, I'm trying to remember to do historic dates that are not only important to me, but to the history of America. And today happens to be one of those days. Today is December 7th, 2024. Now, for some of you, you might be like, and why do I care? Well, today marks the anniversary of December 7th, 1941, the day in which the Japanese uh, uh, attacked us at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in an effort to destroy as much of our uh, South Pacific Fleet as possible. They killed quite a lot of men. Uh, it was a two-prong, really technically two-prong attack. They used what they called Japanese midget subs that were electric, two-man operated subs that carried two torpedoes and a self-detonation device. Those were launched off of larger submarines, but the main bulk of the attack was obviously an air attack, dropping torpedoes and bombs and whatnot on our ships. Heavily concentrated on Battleship Row, where we had them all docked up at port. Um, Killed, a lot of Americans. A lot of local Hawaiians were killed there too. A lot of people were killed in that attack. Um, you know, we America hadn't really had a major attack like that prior to this. Obviously this is pre 9/11, it being in 1941, so it was a unique thing. It was a startling thing, even though there was people in American military intelligence that had a pretty good idea that there was probably an attack coming, and there's uh, arguments to be made that several people were asleep at the wheel. All that aside, it doesn't change the fact for the reality of the men on the ground on the battleships, the ones on land, the nurses that had to tend to them, the doctors that had to tend to them. It doesn't change the reality for any of them. It makes no distinctional difference to them. Uh, the mechanics of it, all they saw was the horrific destruction um, on quite a large scale. If you've never taken much time, which I know most of you probably have that watch my channel, I know we kind of run in the same vein of feelings and thoughts, but if you're younger, and I know the school system teaches you absolutely nothing about, certainly about really anything, but certainly not history. Um, this obviously is what galvanized the American public into supporting the Second World War. This is what gets us to declare war on the Empire of Japan. Uh, the Nazis, Hitler declares war on the United States about 3 days after Pearl Harbor. He declares war on us. We declare war on him, and now we're dragged into the Second World War. Um, Japan did this attack for multiple reasons. They were trying to expand their empire into Southeast Asia. They'd been quite successful at it. They'd started doing it in the late 20s, early 30s. They captured large swaths of territory in Southeast Asia. But the Japanese Empire was crippled by the fact that they didn't have many natural resources on the mainland of Japan. It's part of the reason why they wanted as much territory as they could get in Southeast Asia. Um, and one of the roadblocks to that was the United States, because we cut off our oil supply from the Philippines to Japan in a half hearted attempt to keep the Japanese Empire from continuing its rather obvious and violent war of aggression against specifically the Chinese, but basically everyone in Southeast Asia. Um, uh, it was an attempt to knock the U.S. Pacific Fleet out of the war. And the logic from the Japanese perspective, and it wasn't even bad logic, was by the time they get their naval fleet rebuilt, we will have conquered Southeast Asia. that would have been probably true. And they did largely conquer Southeast Asia. If you look at the battle maps on the territory that the Empire of Japan conquered, um, in that span of time up to about 1942, 43. Um, I think they're taking it all, man. I mean, they ain't holding back none. I mean, they're they've got more than half or right at half of China. I mean, they're steamrolling everything. Now that's mainly because these are largely unorganized, undefended societies. They have very small armies. Um, there's a lot of British presence in China, so there's kind of a default reliance on the British by some of the Chinese. And then you have the Chinese trying to fight. These people were trying to defend their homelands. They really, really were. But they were going against, arguably, uh, the most form fit fighting machine the world had ever seen at that time. Uh, Germany gets all the credit for being the efficient fighting force and all that. And don't get me wrong, the Blitzkrieg, all that, they were able to conquer a large swath of territory quickly. The Japanese did it uh, just as good, and I would argue better at different points. So, without going into rehashing World War II, I'm just saying it's a horrifically bad scar on American history what occurred at Pearl Harbor, and then you get 4 years of bloodshed after that, millions of people being killed and everything around the world, over 400,000 Americans dying in the Second World War. Um, millions of Europeans dying, millions of Chinese and Japanese and endless other people in Southeast Asia dying. It's a horrific time period, and it's all crammed between 1939 and 1945, uh, and we call it the Second World War. But um, a lot of men survived from Pearl Harbor. I knew a guy that's father was at Pearl Harbor, and when he passed, they reinterred him um, back there at Pearl Harbor, which was something that a lot of them did. They will still take their ashes, their remains, and put them back on site, um, which is really cool. Um, that they'll that these men want to be back at Pearl Harbor, and that with all the regulations and BS in the world, that they let them go back to Pearl Harbor. So I've always thought that was a wonderful thing that they let them do that. But for a lot of these men, once they lived through Pearl Harbor, they had to make it through the next 4 years, and a lot of them didn't. A lot of them survived Pearl Harbor and then died at Midway, or died at somewhere else in the Southeast Asia. So this was just the beginning of the ordeal for them, and I know it's quite popular these days to look back at all this kind of stuff, World War I and II, and Korea and Vietnam and all that, and everybody says, well, it was just a waste of time and all this kind of stuff. And in some cases, they're right. We've been in conflicts that didn't benefit the American public. It didn't benefit freedom or relieve people of tyranny. That's true. That's not a secret. But um, to try to take the struggles of people, from World War I or II or whatever, and say it was unnecessary. It wasn't necessary, and it absolutely was necessary. It didn't. It shouldn't have happened. But a lot of the things that carry on in the world shouldn't happen, and they do anyway. And a lot of people seem to think of World War II as the just war, and World War One as a waste of time. And I would encourage you to look more into World War One and its complex causes, the desires of the major players in that, and try to argue that it is distinctly different in any major way, with the exception of the Holocaust from World War II. The ambitions and desires are almost identical. Excuse me, it's very cold out here in the shop. Anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge and remember uh, Pearl Harbor. Not, I don't mean to ramble off about other stuff, but every year that we get farther away from this era, there's less and less people alive that were there. There's very, very few, if any, Pearl Harbor survivors left. It seems like I remember seeing a while back that there was a handful of them left, but I'm not entirely sure if that's even true anymore. So, um, the next best thing for most people is to talk to people that were alive, that were kids during that period of time. Brittany's grandfather was born during the war, for example, and to talk to people like that because their memories are just as valuable. And they grew up with these people that were in this war, the nurses and doctors and the truck drivers and the infantrymen and the Navy guys and all that. And so they heard and picked up information and stuff. Um, and that's the way it's going to be moving forward for all these conflicts, for Korea too and Vietnam, is that the people that were firsthand there aren't going to be around forever. And so you're going to have to talk to people that were their kids or their friends or whatever to hear that. That's why it's important to talk to them now. If you're fortunate enough to know a World War II veteran still, all the ones I know have been dead for years. All right, if if you're still fortunate enough to know one, talk to them. If you can, record them. If they're not comfortable being on a recorder, then write it down. But you're gonna live long enough to regret not having that information recorded. I always wanted to kind of do it like that with my grandfather, but he wasn't very comfortable with that kind of stuff. So, unfortunately, I remember most of the kind of stuff we talked about, so I actually need to write it down. And some of the stories I've told here, so it's recorded here. Um, but if you're fortunate enough to have someone like that was alive during the time or participated in some of this kind of stuff, spend as much time with them as you can because you're going to wish that you had if you don't. Um, but I'm still on antibiotics, still trying to get. I'm over it, but it's like hanging around. So anyway, I am the Reckless Traveler. I won't cough anymore on camera for you. But uh, if you do nothing else today, just take a moment and just watch a brief summary or history of Pearl Harbor, and and just refresh yourself and and think about that for a moment. Just think about what you would have done and what it would have done to you and your family to be in these situations. You owe everything to uh, the men and women that did stuff like this, all the doctors that saved their lives, the nurses that saved their lives, the civilians that were there. There's lots of civilians around that did a lot of incredible stuff. Uh, all these people is what made this world possible. That's also why it's not a bloody waste of time. All right, World War One or two. We'll talk about World War One another day. But I'm just saying, not all wars are created equal. Some of them are objectively immoral and wrong. And God knows America has fought quite a few of those. But the thing that's different is I'm not familiar with any war where our troops, whether it be Vietnam or Korea or World War One or two, that our soldiers were the problem. It might be the politicians are the problem, which that we always know they are. Anyway, remember Pearl Harbor. Remember the Reckless Traveler loves you deeply, and just keep on keeping on. I've been working on the shop, trying to organize it in here some. We're getting a little headway. I'm storing some stuff for my brother, trying to get stuff rearranged. I did hang up my axes over there on the wall. Not all of them. This isn't all of them. But we got the double blades on this side, right there. Got single bits on that side, over there. So it's just, I wanted to get them up off the ground. Anyway, I love you all deeply, and you should try to read a little bit of history every day, or reflect on it, watch a summary, something. It's prologue for tomorrow. Do not negate its importance. It will help you see things that are coming ahead of time, and you won't be surprised when they happen. I am the Rec Late Traveler. Get it? Yeah.